Welcome or welcome back, and thanks for being here. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. If you haven't checked out A Wicked World on Patreon yet, and you want to have access to over 50 exclusive videos, with new ones being added each and every month, then make sure you do that now, using the link in the description box below. So since you liked the last compilation video I did of the world's worst mothers, and with Father's Day coming up soon, I decided to do another list for today's video. This time of the world's worst fathers. The first horrible father belongs to Phoebe Johnchuk. Her father, Johnchuk Jr., yes, that's his real name. He not only provided his daughter with a very unstable living environment throughout her 5 short years of life, but then he also decided that it was his right to murder her too, and in the most heartless and cruel way that he could have. Phoebe J. Johnchuk was born on August 22, 2009, in Tampa, Florida, to her mother, Michelle Kerr, and her father, John Johnchuk Jr. She was said to be a happy and free-spirited little girl, even though her upbringing had been rather unstable, as her parents' relationship was one that was very tumultuous, and police had been called to their home numerous times for DV-related complaints. This had resulted in both of them being arrested multiple times. Phoebe's mother, Michelle, had in the past been charged with child neglect in relation to another child, petty theft, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor, among others. Her father, John, had multiple arrests for DV and battery in relation to Michelle, going back to 2010. He also had a charge from 2013 for battery on his own mother, who was also named Michelle Johnchuk. That same year, he had been arrested for driving under the influence as well. In total, up until 2015, John had been charged with domestic battery 6 times. In every case, the charges were either dropped or never pursued by the victim. So as you can probably gather, Phoebe's father John had some serious anger issues. He was additionally said to be very manipulative and lazy. John had also been involuntarily committed to psychiatric hospitals 27 times under the Baker Act. And he struggled with drug addiction. Phoebe's mother, Michelle, was said to have substance abuse problems too. So due to all of this, Child Protective Services had been involved in Phoebe's life since the time that she was 3. Once, John had even been accused of hitting his daughter in the face. In April of 2012, CPS had been contacted after John choked Phoebe's mother, Michelle. He had also been using methamphetamine and locked his young daughter into a room where powerful pharmaceuticals were located. However, the case would be closed out with no further action taken. Not long after this incident, the young girl's parents broke up. And since Michelle had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis shortly after her daughter was born and she was struggling to properly care for her, she thought that Phoebe would be better off going to live with her father full-time. So while the little girl was in John's care, she would still go to see her mother regularly. That's up until December of 2014, when John began avoiding Michelle and would not let her see Phoebe. That same month, the Child Service Hotline received a phone call saying that John and subsequently his daughter Phoebe did not have a stable home. They had been moving from relative to relative, and most recently, they'd been living with John's father, John Johnchuk Sr. Towards the end of December, John Jr. sent out 6 text messages to different people apologizing. Though he didn't say exactly what for, and it seemed like no one who he sent the messages to knew either, because they didn't respond. Then, even more concerningly, John told his stepmother that Phoebe was a demon. A few weeks later, on January 7, 2015, the father went to speak to his attorney about his daughter's custody case. During this time, he asked his lawyer to translate a Swedish Bible for him and called her God. Then he informed her that his custody case was no longer going to matter, but did not elaborate as to why. This odd behavior immediately concerned the attorney, and as soon as John left her office, she called both Child Protective Services and police. When she spoke with a social worker, the lawyer additionally informed her that John had been hiding his daughter from her mother. And he had recently been driving all over town in his pajamas with Phoebe in tow, during which time he seemed both delusional and depressed. Once this call was received, Child Protective Services simply put a note on the file for a social worker to take care of it another time. The local police, however, would take the attorney's phone call a little more seriously, and they would go out to speak with John. When they located him, he was walking out of a priest's office at a local church. Upon officers questioning him, things appeared to be fine. They noted that Phoebe was smiling and holding her dad's hand. And John assured them that he did not want to hurt himself or his daughter. Rather, he had a new clarity on life. But unbeknownst to officers, the reason why John was walking out of the church when they found him was because he had been driving around to different priests, begging them to give Phoebe an exorcism. Now, once the father and daughter returned back home that evening, they had dinner with John's father, stepmother, and his mother. After that, John and Phoebe fell asleep on the couch. A little while later, around 10 p.m., John's father and stepmother heard the front door open, but they didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. Very early in the morning hours of January 8th, 2015, just after midnight, John, along with Phoebe and his white PT Cruiser, sped towards the iconic Sunshine Skyway Bridge, which spans Tampa Bay between St. Petersburg and Manatee County. A police officer who had been headed home from his shift spotted him. John was crossing over the Dick Meisner Bridge, which is the bridge just prior to the Sunshine Skyway, when suddenly he pulled over and got out of his car. The officer who had been following John also stopped his vehicle and got out. He grabbed his gun and began yelling at the father to back away from his car and show him his hands because he was afraid that John was reaching into his car to grab a weapon. But he wasn't. Instead, John pulled out 5-year-old Phoebe, who had been sitting in the back seat the entire time, and he yelled, "You have no free will." Then he walked over to the side of the bridge, held his daughter over the edge, and before the officer could do anything, he dropped her into the waters of the Boca Ciega Bay. She plunged over 60 feet into the cold, dark waters below. The officer immediately radioed for help. Then he scrambled down a ladder to a dock that was under the bridge. But he could not see Phoebe in the dark waters that also had a very strong current in that area. A Marine rescue boat team was called in to look for the little girl. And about an hour after Phoebe had gone into the water, members of Eckerd College's volunteer search and rescue dive team found her little body floating about a half-mile away from where she had been so cruelly dropped in. First responders performed CPR on Phoebe before the 5-year-old was then life-flighted to a nearby hospital. But sadly, she would be pronounced dead. Now, after John had dropped his daughter off the bridge that night, he had sped off in his car. But he had turned back towards Tampa instead of heading over the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. And he was now driving north in a southbound lane into oncoming traffic. However, multiple police cruisers were in pursuit, and after an over 20-minute chase, having to shatter his tires with road spikes, and holding him at gunpoint, authorities were finally able to arrest John and take him into custody. A subsequent autopsy of Phoebe's body revealed that she had actually survived the over 60-foot drop. Sadly, it was hypothermia from exposure to the cold that had killed her. Her father, Johnchuk Jr., was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated assault with a motor vehicle on law enforcement, and aggravated fleeing. When investigators interrogated him, he began alternating between conversational and combative, and made vague allusions to conspiracies and being manipulated by someone. He would also tell police that his name was God, and he should be addressed as such.
I went looking for answers. I've always had problems growing up, like wondering who I was and how and what my purpose was. And ever since yesterday and a couple days before,
like what? The problems? How do you think you're different?
well, it's like, I don't know, like when I went to the church
What
today,
church?
St. Paul's Catholic Church, and I spoke to Father Bill. He told me that I wasn't going to be ready this Easter, but next Easter, and that I was the Pope. That Francis or whatever is not is not like...
He's not the real Pope?
Yes. And my grandma's name, and I do have Greek heritage, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. My grandma's maiden name is Vladimir. And it's always been weird, and I've had people coming up to me recently and asking me what my name is, and I've only been able to say John. Weeks prior to this, and they would ask me what my last name is, and I would just say John.
But you just physically couldn't say your last name, or
it just
Johnchuk, or it's just John?
It was just John for some reason, and it's like I really had to kind of think about it for a minute.
Then that's just been going on this past week?
Yeah.
When the father was evaluated by a psychiatrist, he told her that the reason why he had killed his daughter was because he believed that she was a demon. And if he didn't take action soon and kill her, everyone was going to hell. He stated that he felt like the Bible, which police had found in his car that night, one of two, was telling everybody that he was the creator. Yes, he claimed the Bible was talking. Then he informed the psychiatrist that he was a really good dad and that Phoebe loved him so much. He said that he had always promised her that he would never let anything happen to her, but then he did. Apparently, in the weeks leading up to Phoebe's murder, John's behavior had been even more concerning than previously thought. He had become so obsessed with the Swedish Bible that he even began taking the old book to bed with him. The obsession continued to the point where he would spread salt around the doorways to ward away bad spirits. John, who worked at a telemarketing company, had also been quoting the Old Testament while at work, especially the one about God commanding Abraham to kill his son, before then deciding to spare the boy's life instead. Now, at first, Johnchuk Jr. was declared unfit to stand trial in relation to his murder charges for his daughter Phoebe. But doctors later decided that his positive reaction to medication made him sufficiently competent to face a jury. And until his trial began in 2019, he remained in a state mental hospital. During a preliminary hearing that happened in December of 2018, a court would hear how John had killed his daughter because of voices in his head. This was laying the groundwork for when he went to trial in March of 2019. And his defense insisted that the only reason why the father had killed Phoebe was because he was insane at the time. John's attorney said that the moment he threw her off the bridge, he thought that he was protecting his daughter. Then the attorney stated, "It will never make sense because it's insanity." However, the prosecution's viewpoint was that John had not fallen into a psychosis. Instead, they believed that he had killed his daughter because he feared losing custody of her. He was also upset that Phoebe's mother was now dating and living with a new man. On top of that, they believed that John had long held on to anger for his own mother, who cared for Phoebe in a way she never had for him because she had abandoned him when he was just 5. In fact, John had told his own mother prior to killing Phoebe that he was going to fuck up the rest of her life. Speaking of John's mother, Michelle, she would testify during his trial. And one thing that she said made the way that Phoebe had been killed seem particularly cruel. Michelle told the court that her granddaughter had always been nervous about swimming, and she would want someone to hold her in the water, while she also wore floaties. Phoebe never learned to swim. At the end of his trial, a jury found 29-year-old Johnchuk Jr. guilty of his daughter Phoebe's murder, and he was then sentenced to life in prison. Shortly after, John's public defender filed a motion asking for a new trial, stating that the judge had made several erroneous decisions. But ultimately, John was denied a new hearing. Now, our next horrible father is Matt Ponamareno, Jack's Ponamareno's father. He took the life of his 5-year-old autistic son in an extremely sick and violent way. Jack Ponamareno was born on July 21st, 2015 in Parma, Ohio, to his mother, Samantha Cherney, and his father, Matt Ponamareno. He was said to be an amazing, happy, and determined 5-year-old who had been diagnosed with autism at the age of 3. But regardless of his disability, Jax could still read and had many words in his vocabulary. though he also used a tablet to help him communicate, since he had a hard time formulating the words for what he wanted. Now, Jax's father, Matthew, had a criminal history dating back to 2011, with previous convictions for disorderly conduct while intoxicated, as well as resisting arrest. Matthew was also known to be a user of methamphetamine, though he was believed to have been clean prior to and at the time that Jax died. Child Services had first become involved with the family in July of 2017, after police had been called by Matthew's mother, who said that her son was having a mental breakdown. He was running after cars as they drove by and swearing at them, all while Jax, who was just a toddler, stood by in nothing but his diaper. Following this incident, Matthew was placed under arrest, and he would admit to officers that at the time, he had been on mushrooms, PCP, and methamphetamine. He would end up being found guilty of child endangerment and ordered to pay a fine of just $212. Due to this, DCF would open an investigation into the family and require that both Jax's mother and father take parenting classes. Their case wouldn't be closed until sometime in 2019. Now, Matthew had also been suffering with anxiety, bipolar, and PTSD for much of his life. But it seemed that he was never able to get the help that he really needed. Every time that he would go into a treatment facility, which he had done a number of times, begging for help, the doctors would just switch his medication and then send him on his way. These hospitals had continually sent the father home after just a few days of treatment, even though he was said to have told the doctors that he did not want to be released because he knew there was something wrong in his head. On top of that, his health insurance would not pay for a 30-day inpatient program. So at the beginning of March 2021, Matthew had just been released from another mental health treatment facility. However, upon leaving the hospital this time, he decided to stop taking the medication that had been prescribed to him, though it's not known exactly what this medication was or what it was for. Now, regardless of his issues, Matthew is said to be a great dad, and Jax's mother, Samantha, would say that he loved his son more than anything. She also claimed that Matthew was just a big soft teddy bear despite his appearance. Not long after the father had been released from treatment this time, on the morning of March 25th, 2021, Jax's grandmother would drop him off at his house in Parma, Ohio. When she did, she noted that the little boy was excited to spend time with Matthew, and the father seemed to be content and happy about seeing his son that day. But it wasn't much later that a call to 911 would be placed from Matthew's home.
911, what's the address to your emergency? And what's the problem? Tell me exactly what happened.
I just killed my son.
What do you mean you just killed your son?
I'm hearing voices.
Oh, okay. How old's your son?
6.
Where's your son now?
He's dead.
Dead where?
In the living room.
All right. Do you have any weapons?
Can you just send in cops?
Yeah, we're doing that now. What's your name?
Matt Ponamareno.
I'm sorry, the first name?
Matt.
Matt? Spell your last name for me, Matt.
Ponamareno.
What's your son's name?
Jack.
Jack?
Jax, Jax.
And you said you're hearing voices?
Yes.
All right, how did you kill your son?
With a baseball bat.
You killed him with a baseball bat?
Mm-hmm.
And why did you kill him with a baseball bat?
I don't know.
Was there anyone else there with you and him?
No.
Shortly after, police officers responded to the home, located on the 4700 block of Russell Avenue. Once they'd arrived, 31-year-old Matthew Ponamareno was standing outside in his front yard, and he would immediately be apprehended. When officers then went inside the home, they discovered 5-year-old Jax lying on the living room floor. He was covered in blood, and authorities stated that they had found signs of torture. Sadly, the little boy would be pronounced dead right at the scene. Once his autopsy was completed, it was determined that Jax had died from blunt force trauma, and his death was a homicide. Matthew Ponamareno was subsequently charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, kidnapping, and 2 counts of child endangerment, and he was held without bond. After being ordered to undergo a series of mental health evaluations, a court-appointed psychologist would find that the father had been suffering with bipolar disorder at the time that he had killed his son. This had significantly impaired his mental capacity. But regardless, Matthew would still be found fit to stand trial, and he was potentially facing the death penalty, if found guilty on his charges. The prosecution stated that what Matthew had done to Jax was one of the most vicious attacks committed by a human being that they had ever seen. They said the fact that it was a father who did this to his young son is incomprehensible. So Matthew's trial was set for February of 2024, but a few months prior, on November 9th, 2023, he would accept a plea deal. He agreed to plead guilty to 1 count of aggravated murder, and in doing so, the death penalty was taken off the table. The judge then handed Matthew a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 45 years. Now, the next horrible father is Chad Doerman. If you haven't already heard of Chad, he was the father of 3 adorable little boys. But one day, he decided to punish his wife by taking all of their lives right in front of her. Clayton, Hunter, and Chase Doerman were 3 sweet and adorable little boys who were born to their parents, Chad and Laura Doerman, and they all lived together in their home in New Richmond, Ohio. While the boys' father, Chad, worked full-time as a member of the Insulators Union, his wife, Laura, stayed at home with their 3 young sons, homeschooling one of them, along with her oldest daughter from a previous relationship, 14-year-old Alexis. When Chad wasn't working, he would often take the boys to local dirt track races or fishing. He even coached third base for Clayton's baseball team. To an outsider, the family seemed to be living a happy and normal life. However, that would all change on the afternoon of June 15th, 2023. The day had started out like any other, with Chad leaving the home around 7 o'clock that morning to go into work. During the day, he would call his own mother to chat for a bit and tell her that he had been feeling rather confused lately. Then, at her advice, Chad drove to a local Kroger and went to the little clinic that was located inside. But the clinic was busy at that time, so he only waited for about 2 minutes before he walked out and left without ever seeing anyone. Chad then headed home, and on his way, he stopped and picked up a 16-ounce Bud Light. Upon arriving at his house, the father played outside with his boys for some time, while Laura made lunch inside. Then, oddly, while they ate, Chad would suddenly stop and say, "This will be my last good meal," which made his wife Laura become concerned that maybe he was planning on taking himself out of the world. Also that afternoon, shortly before 1 p.m., Chad called up his father. And during the conversation, he made a statement that had no context and was frankly rather strange. He told him that Clayton was going to be the hardest one. And while at the time Chad's father had no idea what that meant, he would soon find out. After this call, from roughly 1:15 to 3 p.m., Chad would head outside again to do some yard work and play with the boys. Then around 3:30, he went back inside, picked up a Bible, and began walking around the house, reading it to Hunter. At the same time, he began mumbling, "Chad knows what's right. Chad knows what's right." From there, the father went into his gun safe that was located in the master bedroom. As he did, his wife noticed and told him that he was scaring her. But Chad insisted that he was just kidding and just playing around, and told her that he was instead just gonna lay down for a nap. Then he invited her and the boys into the bedroom to join him. So since Laura did not want him to be alone, thinking that he may hurt himself, she, along with Clayton, Hunter, and Chase, went into the room to take a nap with Chad. This was around 4 p.m. Not long after they laid down, the father told his sons that they were good boys, he loved them, and they had done nothing wrong. Then suddenly he jumped up and grabbed his rifle from the safe. This caused Laura and the boys to begin screaming, thinking that he was going to end his life. At the same time, Laura grabbed her phone to call 911, but Chad ripped it away and threw it across the room, telling her it's too late. It's too late to save those boys. Hunter, who was thinking that his father was going to shoot himself, began begging him not to. Chad would, in response, turn the rifle on him, shooting him twice and killing him. Laura immediately began trying to help her son, and at the same time yelled for Chase and Clayton to run. She also grabbed her phone and called for help. Now, her 14-year-old daughter, Alexis, who had previously been watching TV in the other room, had entered the bedroom when the first shots were fired. She had begun running after Clayton, yelling for him to keep going. But Chad was close behind them, eventually chasing his son into a field. He then shot him in the back from behind, and again, point blank in the head, killing him. Once he was dead, the father carried Clayton's body back to the front yard. As he was doing this, Alexis had re-entered the house and grabbed the youngest boy, Chase. But Chad was following close behind, and he aimed the rifle at her, demanding that she put his youngest son down. So she did, at the same time begging him not to shoot her. And he wouldn't. Instead, the father pointed his weapon at Chase and pulled the trigger. However, it misfired, and the little boy ran to his mother, who was now in the front yard trying to render aid to Clayton. At that point, Chad went back inside the home, picked up Hunter's body, and brought him out to the front yard as well. Then he began to try to wrestle Chase from his wife's arms, biting her in the process. This made her drop Chase, who the father shot in the head. Chad then took his youngest son's body and laid it next to his brother's. From there, he walked over to the outside stoop and simply sat down. He then began watching his wife, who was frantically trying to resuscitate her boys. Laura again called 911 and she screamed into the phone. "I called and nobody came. Their father killed them." Police would finally arrive shortly after at 4:25 p.m. When they did, they were able to place Chad under arrest.
Hands now! Stand up! Stand up! Stand up! Stand up now! Stand up! Stand the fuck up!
Look, you want to go ahead and fly whenever any units can advise.
Get your hands out here. Look, tell me 21. What are you doing, man?
Hey, are you copying all this?
Can I roll over? I ain't gonna hurt you. I ain't gonna hurt nobody. You got anything on you? No, I ain't got nothing, man. Phone, that's it. I ain't mad. I ain't nothing. Just make sure that dog don't come out. I don't think he'll bite you. Just don't reach for him and try to grab him and pet him. All right. He won't bite you.
What's going on, man?
Nothing. Can I stand up? It's kind of uncomfortable.
I'm gonna get
I ain't
you
gonna
here
do
in a
nothing. I ain't
second.
running away. You can do whatever you want with me.
Then, as the father was sitting in the back of the police cruiser, he would yell out, "Tell them I did it. Take me to jail." First responders attempted life-saving measures on the 3 little boys, but all of them would be declared dead at the scene. Their father, Chad Doerman, was charged with 9 counts of aggravated murder, 1 for each gunshot that hit the boys. In addition, he received 8 kidnapping charges and 4 felonious assault charges. He was held on a $20 million bond. When he was later interrogated by police, Chad would claim that he had connections to the CIA and that his wife had poisoned him. He also stated that he had been planning the execution of his sons for a while, since October of 2022, in fact. And because of this plan, he had recently had trouble sleeping. However, these statements that he had made to police would end up being ruled as inadmissible, after a judge found that the detective had not properly informed Chad of his rights and failed to stop questioning him when he had asked for a lawyer. In the days following the murders, Chad would be interrogated multiple times, during which he would give inconsistent statements to police. So even though at one point he claimed that he had no idea who had killed his children, he would also tell authorities that he should have murdered his wife first because she tried to save them. Then, in a recorded jail call that Chad made to his mother, he would be heard saying, "No, I remember everything, all the way to the reasons why and everything." He additionally told her that he had no remorse for his crimes. In another call from behind bars, Chad would tell his brother, referring to news media coverage about him, "They thought Hitler was big dude? I'm matching him." Chad's first court appearance was on June 16, 2023, during which time he pled not guilty. He would later change this plea to not guilty by reason of insanity in March of 2024. The father's attorney would make the claim that his client was struggling with mental illness at the time that he had killed his 3 sons, and was profoundly sick. According to him, 2 experts had analyzed his client's behavior, and they believed that he was seriously mentally ill at the time of the murders. One of these experts stated that he had been suffering from bipolar disorder when he shot them. However, a third expert that was appointed by the court determined that the father did not have a serious mental illness that was impairing him at the time. He had never been diagnosed with, treated for, or prescribed medication for any conditions. So Chad Doerman's trial was slated to begin in July of 2024, but it would end up being delayed. And right before it was about to start, on August 2nd, 2024, he decided to take a plea deal. He pled guilty to his charges in exchange for 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The next individual who is one of the world's worst fathers, because I don't even dare call him a man, is Zara Scruggs' dad, Austin Kamal Stevens. He did one of the worst things imaginable and violated his baby girl, which resulted in her death. Zara Lynn Scruggs was born in Pennsylvania on December 1st, 2019, to her mother, Erica Scruggs, and her father, Austin Kamal Stevens. At the time of this story, the little girl, who was 10 months old, had just begun walking and was also enjoying learning to talk. Zara's mother and father were no longer together, but they had a joint custody agreement for her. However, it was not court mandated, simply a mutual agreement between the two. And for one reason or another, her father, Austin, had sole custody of her at the time of her death. On the night of Saturday, October 3rd, 2020, the father picked up his 10-month-old daughter from her maternal grandparents' house in Norristown, Pennsylvania. He then brought her back to his new place, located on 3454 Germantown Pike in Lower Providence. Austin had actually just moved to this apartment too, just a few days prior, which apparently meant that he did not yet have his heat, electricity, or hot water set up. And that made the temperature in the home at night only around 52 degrees. Then, around 10:40 p.m., 911 would receive a phone call from Austin. He informed them that his daughter Zara was unresponsive and not breathing. Shortly after, police and first responders arrived at his apartment, and they found the little girl lying on his bed with no clothes on, just a diaper. She wasn't breathing, her skin was gray, and she was cold to the touch. While paramedics were trying to save her life and performing CPR on little Zara, Austin was standing by the foot of the bed, looking completely calm, if not emotionless. When the father was then asked by a first responder to hand him a piece of equipment from his bag, he just tilted his head and shrugged after being told that it was the wrong item. Little Zara would be transported to the hospital, where she would be pronounced dead less than 2 hours later, at 12:12 a.m. on October 4th, 2020. Once Austin, who had been arrested at the scene, was informed that his daughter had passed away, he simply sighed. Then, when the father was later questioned, he would tell police that he had been giving his daughter a bath when he briefly stepped out of the room to grab a beer. While he'd been in the kitchen, he suddenly heard a bump and claimed he believed the noise had been from Zara hitting her head. So he'd returned from the bathroom, removed his daughter from the tub, and wrapped her up in a towel. He then began trying to soothe her and placed her on the bed to change her diaper and put her clothes on. But suddenly, Austin claimed that her head fell back and she became unresponsive. According to him, he thought that she had just passed out. It would all become very clear that this was just a bunch of lies after detectives recovered a diaper that had been worn by Zara during her emergency transport, and it was soaked in blood. In addition, it was determined that the little girl's death had been caused by blunt force trauma to her head, and she had sustained severe rectal trauma. Police soon discovered that Austin had not called 911 for nearly an hour after he realized that his daughter was desperately in need of help. This was determined after detectives found searches on his phone in which he had been on Google looking up, "My baby isn't breathing. How do you know if a baby is dead?" And "What if you don't hear a baby's heartbeat?" When he was questioned by authorities about these searches, Austin insisted that he was only trying to figure out what was wrong with Zara himself. He was trying to revive her. He had been searching the internet for tips on how to perform CPR, he said. But police had also discovered evidence that the father had been using his Instagram account to message two separate women as his daughter lay there unresponsive. And in these messages, there was no discussion about Zara being in trouble or needing any urgent medical care. Austin's response when he was asked about these chats was, "It's just a girl I talk to." And then he said that he didn't even have a full-blown conversation, which makes, I don't know, zero difference. Police additionally questioned the father about why he had waited more than 70 minutes to call 911 after he realized that something was seriously wrong with Zara. He said, "I was panicking. Time was rolling. I wasn't paying attention to time. I was working the phone, working her body, pumping her chest, trying to bring her back. I did what I could." But by the end of his interrogation, the father would finally admit that he had waited much too long to call 911. Austin Kamal Stevens was charged with aggravated SA, RAPE of a child, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, aggravated indecent assault, endangering the welfare of a child, and other criminal counts. He was held on a $1 million bond. That, however, would quickly be revoked when the charge of first-degree murder was added to his others during a preliminary court hearing. Now, it seemed like no one around Austin had sensed the evil that was lurking deep down inside. He had always made himself look like a caring, loving, and driven father. After her daughter's death, Erica Scruggs would write on Facebook, "He fooled us all, I promise you from the bottom of my heart. Please do not attack his family or his friends. He will pay." Austin's mother also wanted to make it publicly known that he is a monster, and neither she or his father support him. Colleagues of Austin's from Black Diamond Construction, where he was a co-owner, say that what happened is not at all in his character, and that there had to have been some other variables at play, which resulted in his charges. The father had also worked as an assistant youth football coach for the Lower Providence Warriors, meaning that he had access to other children too. In the end, 31-year-old Austin Stevens would be found guilty on his charges in relation to his daughter Zara's death, and he was sentenced to life behind bars. The last shitty father we have today is Stephen Clare, 11-month-old Willow Clare's father. He not only killed her just days before her first birthday, but he also attempted to kill her mother, sister, and 2 brothers. Willow Grace Clare was born in San Antonio, Texas on April 13, 2022, to her mother, Mariah Gardner, and her father, Stephen Clare. She had a big sister named Rosalie, who was her very best friend, and also 2 older brothers who were from her mother's previous relationship. The children's mother, Mariah, was a 28-year-old stay-at-home mom, and her 50-year-old husband, Stephen, worked as a nurse practitioner at a local clinic. The couple met back in 2017 and later started dating in 2019. When they did, Stephen completely swept Mariah off her feet, showering her with love and gifts, aka love bombing. About 2 years later, in June of 2021, the couple was tying the knot. Their happiness didn't last long, though, as Stephen quickly began trying to control Mariah's behavior. He made her quit her job and stay at home with the children, and he did not allow her to see her family or friends any longer, telling her that none of them loved her as much as he did, so she didn't need them anyways. So by January of 2023, Mariah decided that she had had enough, and she was going to leave her husband. First, she got a job, found a home for her and her children, then she filed for divorce and moved out. After their split, Mariah and Stephen continued to co-parent Willow and her sister as they had been awarded joint custody. But Stephen was having a hard time coming to terms with the fact that he was losing Mariah and subsequently losing control over her too. And so he began trying to win her back. One time he left flowers and a love note on her door, and many days he would jokingly text her. But Mariah wasn't falling for it. She wasn't going to take him back. On the evening of April 10th, 2023, Stephen was over Mariah's new house, helping get Willow and her sister ready for bed. But soon, a fight broke out between the former couple. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Stephen was assaulting Mariah, and he had pulled out a gun and pointed it at her. She was terrified, but began fighting back, trying to get the weapon out of his hand. At the same time, one of Mariah's older sons saw what was happening, and he jumped on Stephen's back, trying to protect his mother. But Stephen, being much bigger than the boy, was able to fling him off. Then he turned and shot Mariah. Next, he began running around the house, hunting her two sons down like they were prey. Luckily, the boys were able to lock themselves inside a bathroom, then make their way out the window and begin running down the street, calling for help. But Mariah and the girls were still trapped inside the home with Stephen, and he was on a complete rampage. He was punching holes in walls, breaking glass, and shooting at Mariah and his daughters. The mother was determined to block the bullets with her body, though, and she did everything she could to make sure that Stephen did not hit Rosalie or Willow. She ended up taking an entire 6 rounds to her own body. However, once he'd run out of ammunition, Stephen had another plan. He went into the kitchen, grabbed a large knife, picked up both his daughters, and laid them on the floor of the entryway. That's when he began viciously stabbing them over and over again in the abdomens. When he believed they were dead, Stephen fled the home. Luckily, authorities were not far behind and were able to place him under arrest. By the time paramedics arrived, Mariah, who had been shot a total of 6 times, had pulled herself out of the house. And she was lying on the sidewalk in a pool of her own blood, sure that she would not make it. 2-year-old Rosalie and 11-month-old Willow were found inside the home, and they both had stab wounds so severe that their intestines were falling out. Baby Willow would be transported to one hospital, while Mariah and Rosalie were transported to another. They all immediately went into emergency surgery. Sadly, little Willow, who was just 2 days shy of her first birthday, would not pull through. The wounds that had been inflicted to her tiny little body proved to be much too much. Luckily, though, both Mariah and her 2-year-old daughter Rosalie would survive and go on to make full recoveries. The mother would later say that Stephen had always had a dark sense of humor and had once told her about his homicidal and kidnapping ideations. One time, he even hypothetically said that if he had to line up all his children in front of a firing squad, the only one he would save would be Rosalie. He had also joked about kidnapping Mariah and had, without care, kicked her out of the house when she was 36 weeks pregnant with Willow. Stephen Clare would end up being charged with capital murder, attempted capital murder, and aggravated assault. He was given a $3.5 million bond, which was later revoked. Prosecutors announced that they will be seeking the death penalty against him, and he is currently still in jail awaiting his trial. Well, those are some of the world's worst fathers who betrayed their children in some of the most awful and unimaginable ways. If you want to view the full video for any of the cases that I covered today, make sure you check the description box below. I'll include the links down there. And as always, thank you for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care, guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon, so check it out on patreon.com/awickedworld, or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims are never forgotten, and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a story you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email to awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.